Good morning, everyone. This is Russell Rucker, and I'm here for another constitutional talk. You know, we've talked about the Stamp Act before and the Stamp Act Congress, and I want to bring you back to February 13, 1765. We're in London. The Prime Minister, Rockingham, has invited Franklin to speak before the House of Commons on the Stamp Act. Now, he was questioned by Lord Grenville, who wrote the Stamp Act, Charles Townshend, who would later become the namesake for the Townshend Acts, and by Edmund Burke. Now, there were a number of people to speak that day, and Edmund Burke had the power of the lineup, and he chose to have Franklin last, which was really an incredible feat. Now, when it was over, Edmund Burke said that Franklin had spoke like a schoolmaster talking to school children. He really knew what he was referring to, and I printed out today the questions. Now, if you've listened to Congress from time to time on C-SPAN or something, and you've got some witnesses coming before Congress, and there's a question and answer thing, and that's kind of what you have here. Now, these three men were the questionnaires in the House of Commons, and let's just go through this a little bit. And they're talking to Benjamin Franklin. What is your name and place of abode? And Benjamin Franklin answers, Franklin of Philadelphia. Do the Americans pay any considerable taxes among themselves? Certainly, many and very heavy taxes, says Franklin. What are the present taxes in Pennsylvania laid by the laws of the colony? There are taxes on all estates, real and personal, a poll tax, a tax on all offices, professions, the trades and businesses according to their profits, an excise on all wine, rum, and other spirits, and a duty of 10 pounds per head on all Negroes imported with some other duties. For what purposes are those taxes laid? And Franklin answers, for the support of the civil and military establishments of the country, and to discharge the heavy debt contracted in the last war. Now, what we're referring to in the war was the 7 Years' War or the French and Indian War. Okay, there were expenses and taxes and that, and keep in mind when he's talking about the country, this is 1765. This is not the United States. This is England. How long are those taxes to continue? Those for discharging the debt are to continue till 1772 and longer, if the debt should not be then all discharged. The others must always continue. Was it not expected the debt would have been sooner discharged? And Franklin says it was when the peace was made with France and Spain, but a fresh war breaking out with the Indians. A fresh load of debt was incurred, and the taxes, of course, continued longer by a new law. Are not all the people very able to pay those taxes? No. The frontier counties all along the continent have been frequently ravaged by the enemy, and the greatly impoverished are able to pay very little tax, and therefore, in consideration of their distresses, our late tax laws do expressly favor those counties, excusing the sufferers, and I suppose the same is done in other governments. In other words, those unable to pay did get some relief. Are not you concerned in the management of the post office in America? Yes, I am Deputy Postmaster General of North America. Don't you think the distribution of stamps by post to all the inhabitants very practicable if there was no opposition? And this is the key with Britain. They're talking about the opposition to the Tax Act and what if there was no opposition. But Franklin says the posts only go along the seacoast. They do not, except in a few instances, go back into the country. And if they did, sending for stamps by post would occasion an expensive postage, amounting in many cases to much more than that of the stamps themselves. And they ask, are you acquainted with Newfoundland? And Franklin said, never was there. Do you know whether there are any post roads on that island? I have heard that there are no roads at all, but that the communications between one settlement and another is by sea only. Can you disperse the stamps by post in Canada? There is only a post road between Montreal and Quebec. The inhabitants live so scattered and remote from each other in that vast country that posts cannot be supported among them, and therefore they cannot get stamps per post. The English colonies, too, are along the frontiers, are very thinly settled. Franklin describes the situation in America to the House of Commons fairly well. From the thinness of the back settlements, would not the Stamp Act be extremely inconvenient to the inhabitants if executed? To be sure it would, as many of the inhabitants could not get stamps when they had occasion for them without taking long journeys and spending perhaps 3 or 4 pounds that the crown might get 6 pence. In other words, it just wasn't worth it. They go on and ask, are not the colonies from their circumstances very able to pay the stamp duty? And Franklin says, in my opinion, there is not gold and silver enough in the colonies to pay the stamp duty for 1 year. Don't you know that money arising from stamps was all to be laid out in America? I know it is appropriated by the Act to the American service, but it will be spent in the concurred colonies where the soldiers are not in the colonies that pay it. Is there not a balance of trade due from colonies where the troops are posted that will bring back the money to the old colonies? And Franklin responds, I think not. I believe very little would come back. I know of no trade likely to bring it back. I think it would come from the colonies where it was spent directly to England. For I have always observed that in every colony, the more plenty the means of remittance to England, the more goods are sent for, and the more trade with England carried on. What member of white inhabitants do you think are in Pennsylvania? I suppose there may be about 160,000. What number of them are Quakers? Perhaps a third. What number are Germans? Perhaps another third, but I cannot speak with certainty. Have any number of the Germans seen service as soldiers in Europe? Yes, many of them, both in Europe and America. Are they as much dissatisfied with the stamp duty as the English? Yes, and more with reason, as their stamps are in many cases to be double. How many white men do you suppose there are in North America? Franklin says about 300,000 from 16 to 60 years of age. What may be the amount of 1 year's imports into Pennsylvania from Britain? I have been informed that our merchants compute the imports from Britain to be above 500,000 pounds. What may be the amount of the produce of your province exported to Britain? It must be small, as we produce little that is wanted in Britain. I suppose it cannot exceed 40,000 pounds. How then do you pay the balance? The balance is paid by our produce carried to the West Indies and sold in our own islands, or to the French, Spaniards, Danes, and Dutch, by the same carried to other colonies in North America, as in New England, Nova Scotia, Newfoundland, Carolina, and Georgia, by the same carried to different parts of Europe as Spain, Portugal, and Italy, in all which places we received other money, bills of exchange, or commodities that suit for remittance to Britain, which together with all the profits of the industry of our merchants and manners arising in those circuitous voyages, and the freight made by their ships center finally in Britain to discharge the balance and pay for British manufactures continually used in the province or sold to foreigners by our traders. Have you heard of any difficulties lately laid on the Spanish trade? Yes, and I've heard that it has been greatly obstructed by some new regulations and by the English men of war and the cutters stationed all along the coast of America. Do you think it right that America should be protected by this country and pay no part of the expense? And Franklin says, that is not the case. The colonies raised, clothed, and paid during the last war near 25,000 men and spent many millions. Were you not reimbursed by Parliament? We were only reimbursed what, in your opinion, we had advanced beyond our proportion or beyond might reasonably be expected from us, and it was a very small part of what we spent. Pennsylvania in particular dispersed about 500,000 pounds, and the reimbursement as whole did not exceed 60,000 pounds. You have said that you pay heavy taxes in Pennsylvania. What do they amount to in the pound? And Franklin cites a tax on all estates, real and personal, is 18 pence in the pound, fully rated, and the tax on the profits of trades and professions with other taxes do, I suppose, make up full half a crown to the pound. Do you know anything in the rate of exchange in Pennsylvania and whether it has fallen lately? And Franklin answers, it is commonly from 170 to 175. I have heard that it has fallen lately from 175 to 162 and a half, owing, I suppose, to their lessening their orders for goods. And when their debts to these countries are paid, I think the exchange will probably be at par. Do you not think that people of America would submit to pay the stamp duty if it was moderated? No, never, unless compelled by force of arms. Are not the taxes in Pennsylvania laid on unequally in order to burden the English trade, particularly the tax on professions and businesses? It is not more burdensome in proportion than the tax on lands. It is intended and supposed to take an equal proportion of profits. How is the assembly composed? Of what kind of people are the members, landholders, or traders? It is composed of landholders, merchants, and artifactors. Are not the majority landowners? And Franklin said, well, I believe they are. Do they, as much as possible, shift the tax from the land to ease that and lay the burden heavier on trade? And he answers, I've never understood it so. I've never heard such a thing suggested. And indeed, an attempt of that kind could answer no purpose. The merchant or trader is always skilled in figures and ready with his pen and ink. If unequal burdens are laid on the trade, he puts an additional price on his goods. And the consumers who are chiefly landowners finally pay the greatest part, if not the whole. Then they ask of Franklin, what was the temper of America towards Great Britain before the year 1763? The best in the world, he says. They submitted willingly to the government of the crown and paid in all their courts obedience to acts of parliament. Numerous as the people are in several old provinces, They cost you nothing in forts, citadels, garrisons or armies to keep them in subjection. They were governed by this country at the expense only of a little pen, ink, and paper. They were led by a thread. They had not only a respect by the affection for Great Britain, for its laws, its customs, and mariners, and even a fondness for its fashions. They greatly increased the commerce. Natives of Britain were always treated with particular regard. To be an old England man was of itself a character of some respect, and gave a kind of rank among us. And what is their temper now? And Franklin says, oh, very much altered. Did you hear the authority of Parliament to make law for America questioned till lately? And Benjamin Franklin cites the authority of Parliament was allowed to be veiled in all law, except such as should lay internal taxes. It was never disputed to laying duties to regulate commerce. In what proportion hath population increased in America? I think the inhabitants of all the provinces together taken a median double in about 25 years, but their demand for British manufacture increased much faster, as the consumption is not merely in proportion to their numbers, but grows with the growing ability of the same numbers to pay for them. In 1723, the whole importation from Britain to Pennsylvania was but about 15,000 pounds sterling. It is now nearly 500,000. And they question further, in what light did the people of America used to consider the Parliament of Great Britain? And he cites, they considered the Parliament as the great bulwark and security of their liberties and privileges, and always spoke of it with the utmost respect and veneration. Arbitrary ministers, they thought, might possibly at times attempt to oppress them, but they relied on it, that the Parliament on application would always give redress. They remembered with gratitude a strong instance of this when a bill was brought into Parliament with a clause to make royal instruction laws in the colonies, which the House of Commons would not pass, and it was thrown out. And have they not still the same respect for Parliament? No. It is greatly lessened. To what causes is that owing? To a concurrence of causes, the restraints lately laid on their trade, by which bringing of foreign coin and silver in colonies was prevented, the prohibition of making paper money amongst themselves, and then demanding a new and heavy tax by stamps, taking away at the same time trials by juries, and refusing to receive and hear their human petitions. Don't you think they would submit to the Stamp Act if it was modified, the obnoxious parts taken out, and the duty reduced to some particulars of small moment? No, they will never submit to it. What do you think is the reason the people of America increase faster than in England? Because they marry younger, and more generally. Why so? Because the young couple, they are industrious, may easily obtain land of their own on which they can raise a family. Are not the lower rank of people more at their ease in America than in England? There may be so, if they are sober and diligent, as they are better paid for their labor. And one of the things when you talk about this, when you have land and you're given a stake in what you achieve, you will work harder. You'll work longer hours. It's human nature to try to succeed. What is your opinion of a future tax imposed on the same principle with that of the Stamp Act? How would the Americans receive it? Just as they do this, they would not pay it. Have you not heard of the resolution of the House and the House of Lords asserting the right of Parliament relating to America, including the power and tax the people there? Yes, I've heard of such resolutions. What will be the opinion of the Americans on those resolutions? They will think them unconstitutional and unjust. What, in an opinion in America before 1763, the Parliament had the right to lay taxes and duties there? And Franklin says, I never heard any objection to the right of laying duties to regulate commerce. But a right to lay internal taxes was never supposed to be in Parliament, and we are not represented there. On what do you found your opinion that the people in America made such distinction? I know that whenever the subject was occurred in conversation, where I've been present, it has appeared to be the opinion of everyone that we could not be taxed in a parliament where we were not represented, but the payment of duties laid by act of parliament as regulation of commerce was never disputed. Franklin goes on and on explaining the situation in America. So the interesting thing here is that Parliament considers Ben Franklin an American. But over time, Americans consider Franklin a European, because Franklin spent so much time in either England or France as a diplomat that they just didn't see him as an American any longer. Because frankly, he really wasn't living in America anymore. This lengthy question and answer between the House of Commons and between Ben Franklin is important. And in part is the reason why the Stamp Act was overturned. The problem is, the same time they eliminated the Stamp Act, they also passed into law the Townshend Act. And as I was mentioning earlier, Townshend was one of those from the House of Commons questioning them. His name being attached to the Townshend Acts. And as you listen to Franklin explain the situation in America, that they just really can't afford to pay these taxes, that it would soak up all the hard value of currency here because it all had to be paid in silver. It couldn't be paid in scrip. And this is part of the problem too. The problem, the British Parliament being so far away across the ocean just didn't understand the American colonies. It didn't get what their main complaint was, that they shouldn't be allowed to tax us without some kind of due representation. And this really is where it goes to. I hope you get a real good feel for this, and but it is fairly long, and I'm going to stop here for today, and we'll pick up the next week, and we'll finish up this question and answer period. But I want you to get a good idea and think about what was really at play. That all these events kind of lead one to another and eventually culminate in a revolutionary war and in ourselves achieving freedom and liberty. Now think about that for a little bit, and we'll catch you next week, and we'll finish up next week on the next Constitutional Talk. You folks have a good day for now. And bye. Please subscribe to my videos. Follow me. I'd really appreciate it. We need your support, and it costs you nothing. Thank you for your time. Have a good day. Goodbye for now.